Welcome to Decision Vision, a podcast series focusing on critical business decisions. Brought to you by Brady Ware & Company. Brady Ware is a regional, full-service accounting and advisory firm that helps businesses and entrepreneurs make visions a reality.
Welcome to Decision Vision, a podcast giving you, the listener, a clear vision to make great decisions. In each episode, we discuss the process of decision-making on a different topic from the business owner's or executive's perspective. We aren't necessarily telling you what to do, but we can put you in a position to make an informed decision on your own and understand when you might need help along the way. My name is Mike Blake, and I'm your host for today's program. I'm a director at Brady Ware & Company, a full-service accounting firm based in Dayton, Ohio, with offices in Dayton, Columbus, Ohio, Richmond, Indiana, and Alpharetta, Georgia. My practice specializes in providing fact-based strategic and risk management advice to clients that are buying, selling, or growing the value of companies and their intellectual property. Brady Ware is sponsoring this podcast, which is being recorded in Atlanta per social distancing protocols. If you would like to engage with me on social media with my chart of the day and other content, I'm on LinkedIn as myself and at Unblakeable on Facebook, Twitter, Clubhouse, and Instagram. I also recently launched a new LinkedIn group called A Group That Doesn't Suck, so please join that as well if you would like to engage. If you like this podcast, please subscribe on your favorite podcast aggregator, and please consider leaving a review of the podcast as well. Today's topic is, should I pivot? And we've done this topic before, probably about a year and a half ago. But as you know, if you've been a long time listener, you know that I don't mind revisiting a topic every once in a while, because certain topics I think just lend themselves well to different angles, different approaches. And something like a pivot also, in my experience, is a deeply personal experience. And so everybody's going to come to a pivot, is going to experience a pivot, is going to engage with it, embrace it or not in their own unique way. And so it's one of those kind of evergreen topics that I don't think we'll ever get to a point where nobody ever pivots anymore. And also, you know, frankly, from a very practical perspective, now that we're recording podcast 140 something or whatever, like 148, I guess, or 149, you know, the reality is that most people don't go back and listen to a lot of the back catalog. We're not Led Zeppelin. People aren't going back to the initial records and trying to find the original recording. So, if you're like most people and you're relatively new to the podcast, statistically speaking, this will be a topic that we actually haven't covered before. And if you want to hear more about it, then you can go back into the deep tracks in the archive somewhere around in the double digit episodes. So I hope you're going to find this topic and this conversation as engaging as I anticipate that it will be. You know, pivots are interesting because there are some very famous ones I don't think people necessarily realized. Cornelius Vanderbilt, yes, that Vanderbilt family, initially started out with steamships. They actually started out with river barges around the island of Manhattan, and they're basically providing cut rate ferry service across the Hudson and East rivers, and in doing so, got a lot of people killed because they used rickety boats. But that's how they charged less for what they did. They eventually did pivot into steamships, which presumably were safer. I don't know. I don't have any data on that. And then eventually railroads. William Wrigley, whom you may know from Wrigley's gum. I don't chew gum because it would rip out all my dental work, but for those of you who do have good teeth, you may know of Wrigley, and they originally were a baking powder company. Twitter, of all things, launched as a podcast directory. Yelp began as an automated email service, and YouTube, believe it or not, was once a dating site. So we have Tinder now and we have all the others, but YouTube actually was not the YouTube that we know of today. And you know, I find it also an interesting topic because I find myself at odds intellectually with the investment community on one particular topic, and that is, should you bet the jockey or the horse? And what that means to those of you who aren't necessarily speaking Silicon Valley means that do you place the bet on the management of a startup, or do you place your bet on the basic idea of the startup? And most investors will tell you that they bet the jockey, they bet the management team over the actual idea, figuring that a management team will actually figure it out. the data, and this is empirically studied. Now, this is actually a fairly old study, but still very good. It was published in the Journal of Finance back in 2011, called "Do You Bet the Jockey or the Horse?" And the empirical study determined that, in fact, the companies that generated the most value in their IPOs were the ones that had kept the fundamental idea more or less start to finish, but actually had switched management teams. And the reason behind that, I think, is that, again, probably torching this analogy beyond where it needs to go. If you have a slow horse, the best jockey in the world is not going to win the race with a slow horse. They may prevent you from coming in last. They may prevent you from having the horse fall over, break its leg, and you have to shoot it right there on the track. But even a great management team can't take a slow horse and win the Kentucky Derby. However, if you have the fastest horse, an average jockey might win that race because you actually have the fastest horse. So I think that there's something to that. So finding the right idea, finding the right business model, I think this highlights how important that is, because if you don't have the right business, you don't have the right model, and the data says this, not just Mike Blake talking into a microphone on the internet. The data suggests that there's only so far a mediocre idea, a mediocre business concept will take you. And I don't care if you're going to have the best management team of the world, and you can dig up Jack Welch and Steve Jobs and everybody else that you might have idolized. Warren Buffett. You're just not going to be. You can only take that so far. And I guess that's why I find pivots so interesting, because a pivot is truly an existential decision. I think it is one of the most important decisions that are made in business, and probably one that is not as appreciated as much as it should be. So fortunately, coming on to join us is somebody who is either sort of at the later stages or fresh off a pivot. She'll tell us exactly where she is on it. But joining us is Jocelyn Brady, who is the creative brain jostler and brain utainer. She is a writer, speaker, and professional brain jostler who thrives at the intersection of comedy, storytelling, and unraveling the mysteries of the human brain. When she's not being the Bill Nye of the brain, as the creator and host of her series Tiny Tips, the internet's favorite way to brain, Jocelyn applies her certified brain coaching chops to help creative visionaries tap their brain's greatest potential. In her past life as an award-winning copywriter, creative director, and agency CEO, Jocelyn led narrative strategy and international storytelling training for some of the world's biggest brands. She also produced and co-hosted Party Time, a stand-up comedy and storytelling show featuring talent who went on to write or perform for Conan O'Brien, Stephen Colbert, and Comedy Central, all while managing to keep her 2 cats and houseplants alive. And I've seen at least one of the cats and one of the plants, so we do have proof of life for at least one of each. Jocelyn Brady, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much.
Oh, and before you jump in, I forgot to mention it. This is really important because you're doing something that I'm struggling to do myself. Jocelyn's first book, tentatively titled "Your Brain is a Magical Ass Hat," is slated for publication next year. Jocelyn, again, welcome to the program, and congratulations on writing a book. I'm struggling to do that, but it's hard to do that in crayon.
Oh man, it's hard to even think about or talk about writing a book, let alone actually doing it. But yeah, I highly recommend joining other people, a coaching program or other people who are doing it, just like getting some of that accountability. That's the biggest thing, is just creating that structure, right? Stick with it. And
so we have you here to talk about pivots. And as I like to do on the show, just in case somebody who's listening really doesn't know what a pivot is, when you hear the term pivot, what does that mean to you?
I think a lot of this, I imagine the basketball move, like, okay, we were going to go this way and now we go this way. I know nothing about basketball, but people do pivot.
You're doing great. Yeah.
So it's just changing course, right? Deciding to move in a new direction, and it could be sudden.
So what did your company originally set out to do?
Well, when I started in 2008, all I wanted to do was make a living writing. And, it was literally starting with, can I earn enough to eat a sandwich today? And then it started just growing really quickly. I didn't have any business experiences in my 20s. I didn't have a plan. I just thought, I'm good at writing. I'll figure it out. and got into, copywriting, and one thing led to another. More clients were coming my way. I accidentally had more work than I could handle. So I hired a team of writers, and that grew into not just with like content development or copywriting, but also then developing the brand voices and narrative strategy and overseeing their most important projects. Like, what is the CEO saying in their annual meeting or to shareholders, or what are you putting in your video scripts, and even overseeing a Super Bowl ad for a big company. And so we were developing that tone of voice and then training the teams on how to be better storytellers. And like I said, I didn't really set out with any grand plan or dream or vision. It was just, I just want to make a living writing.
And sandwiches. You wanted sandwiches.
I wanted sandwiches. Yeah.
So you started this.
Cats.
So and your cats wanted kibbles or fancy feasts, whatever you feed them. We feed them. We feed ours children. It seems to keep them happy. So you started this thing, and it sounds like it was pretty successful, right? If anything, maybe so successful that in itself provided a challenge. What were some signs that things in this company weren't meeting your expectations?
I started to get bored. I started to almost resent the projects that were coming in. And I knew that's not a good place to be. You don't want to resent work coming in or pass that along to the clients themselves. It's just a horrible way to approach something and to work with people. So I think it was just the itch, like, this isn't satisfying. It's not fulfilling. And a lot of the time when you start something, you grow up or you excel and you become now a manager of people, and you're doing less of the thing that you started doing. It's like the story as old as time in any company or large corporations, especially. You're really good at a skill, and then you get promoted and you're like, wait a minute, now I'm just doing completely different things. Making sure the business is functioning and that we have good cash flow, and are the people doing their jobs, and how do we manage when, people are out or leave or get vengeful, or nobody's gotten vengeful, but you got to prepare for all the scenarios. So I think that was the main thing, is just feeling misaligned with what I was doing.
It's interesting you bring that up, because I think that one of the most underappreciated differentiators of a Bill Gates, of a Sarah Blakely, of a Steve Jobs and Mark Zuckerberg is that, in addition to all the things that people know they brought to the table, their innovation, their energy, their messaging and so forth, their vision, but also the skill set and the desire to run and thrive in a startup as well as in a Fortune 100 company. That is not easy to do, right? Because you're not just scaling a person, you have to scale yourself. And not to go all self-help guru here, because I'm not it, but not many people can make that journey or want to make that journey, because when you're running Apple, it's not the same thing as writing code and being in there and designing the products and everything, which I suspect was probably the case with Steve Wozniak, why he sort of took a less prominent role. I don't know Steve. I call him Steve. He calls me, who the hell are you? But I suspect that's kind of what happened. Is listening to his interviews, reading what he writes, he would not have had any fun and probably not a lot of success running that kind of company. And it sounds like a little bit of that may apply to you too, that you started to get far away from what you were doing because of the way the company was growing and somebody had to run it. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, there's still things that I did love. So the more I was doing the workshops, I realized I loved that. I really loved interacting with people, coming up with ideas on the fly, helping people pull out the creative ideas, and just that like live interaction. And you never know really what's going to happen versus, and I still love writing. Obviously, I'm working on a book, and I'm also working on a really big network project. But I take those few and far between, because now I realize if I'm working on a project, if I'm outsourcing my writing skills, I have to absolutely love this project. That became very clear. And on the other side of that is I love spending my time just working directly with people and things where you're not sitting alone banging your head against the wall going, help, it's just me here writing. So, even when we had a pretty significant team, everybody was working remotely. We rarely got together. So it can be lonely even as part of a team.
I would argue sometimes it's lonelier. Because one of the biggest challenges of leadership is to sort of get out there and put a smile on your face when it's the last thing that you want to do. And when you're responsible for the care and feeding of a team that has entrusted you to become the platform of their careers and in some case their life satisfaction, that is a very lonely place to be.
Yeah, and it could be really scary. And it's really helpful to connect with other entrepreneurs and people running businesses, because you just simply can't relate to what it's like to feel responsible for not just yourself, but all the other people who are looking up to you, like, hey, what's happening next? And let alone, like, I'm sure we'll get more into this, but COVID, as for many of us, was like, everything's going to hell. And that's when all of my big contracts vanished. So the ones I didn't want were no longer a problem.
Yeah.
And, but it was terrifying because I now had to let my team go. I had to tell them, there's no more work and I would love to keep you around, but I can't pay you. So,
right.
Yeah.
I've never had to let a whole team go, but I have let people go in my career. But, I got to imagine that conversation or series of conversations. I don't know whether you did it in a group or you did it individually. I'm sure you didn't do it like that Button CEO did it with over Zoom and calling people thieves on the way out. I'm sure you didn't do it that way. But I mean, that's got to be the hardest conversation, one of the top 5 you'll ever have in your life.
Yeah, it's like a divorce, right? It's just not working out between us.
Yeah.
There's a lot of emotion. And I got to say, with my longtime assistant, she was 5 or 6 years, this one, and I absolutely loved her. And I knew that she wanted to get more into filmmaking. She'd been doing, but she really wanted to move to LA and try it, for real. And I really wanted for her to do that. So when this came around, I think for both of us, it was like the best breakup I could ever imagine, because it was sad and we were, really emotional, but also really glad for each other. She decided to go to LA. She just got a role with I think I'm allowed to talk about it now. Haley Joel Osment is in it. James Frank, the other Franco directed it, Allison Brie. So anyway, I couldn't imagine a better outcome. And I think when you have people's best interest in mind and you be as vulnerable as you can and say what's really happening, and that's really, really scary and can be really hard to do. And I think it takes a lot of practice. I don't think a lot of us are well-versed or trained to do that, especially in a business setting. There's like this idea you need to be professional and you can't say emotional things. And
right.
But to me, that is crucial and really important for human development, relationships, behavior, all of it.
Yeah. And I think it's rapidly becoming best practices too. The world has changed, obviously. It's an open question to what extent we'll go back to 2019. It's not going to be 100%. I think we all know that. So your pivot story, it sounds like that COVID accelerated a pivot that might have happened anyway because you really weren't loving what you were doing. Is that fair?
Yeah, exactly. It had been on my mind for a year, and I'd been talking to my team about making transitions. And that came along, was like, well, I guess decision made. You're doing it now.
Right.
So
COVID happens. You let your team go. What do you do the next day?
Cry a lot.
Okay.
Mixed feelings. I was really excited about a new direction, but also terrified. And it's so difficult to have built something up and then it's completely gone, in a sense where it's starting over. It's just me again. I have nothing. I have enough to sort of buy a few months, thankfully. But other than that, it's like, what am I doing? And that's not entirely true, because I did have the 4 years prior, or 2016, 2017, I got certified as a brain coach, but it's something I sort of kept secret, because as someone who works with words, I couldn't wrap my head around how to love the word coach. I hated it. I was like, this is disgusting. I hate the word coach. The baggage I feel like it comes with, it seems so phony. I just had all these attachments, the unhealthy attachments to the meaning of the word, the meaning I was making. And at the same time, I was still doing it, still coaching people in private for 4 years. It was just, now I got to, okay, if you really want to be doing this, own it. If you really want to be speaking, tell people you are a speaker. Go out there and speak. Go do the thing. You got nothing to lose now. You got everything to gain, because otherwise we'll just be, moving with the cats into the crawl space and hope the new landlord doesn't know, the new owner doesn't know.
So I'm going to ask you sort of a semi-unfair question, but I feel like I want to ask it anyway. COVID gave you kind of the jolt, if you will, sort of forced the pivot on you. Do you think if the pandemic hadn't happened, you would have made a pivot like this anyway?
I'd like to think so. I think eventually I would have. I do know that once I decide I'm doing something with full conviction, I'll do it. But I definitely think it would have taken me longer. I would have had feelings about not wanting to let my team go. And so if they don't want to come with me on the new ride, then that would have been the end of that anyway. So, yeah, it's always hard to say and you never know what you're like until really confronted with the situation.
That's true. That's entirely fair. So I have to get back to something, because I think it's such a, I do think it's a polarizing word, and that is the word of coach. And I'd love to hear your perspective on it. My view of the word has changed over the years, but I don't want to suck all the air out of the room. Tell me why you have such a negative relationship with that word.
I think I did not have a lot of exposure to coaches, or to good coaches in business, life coaching, whatever the case, right? I'm not counting basketball coaches, which, as we've established, I know nothing about. But when it comes to that mindset and direction, achieving goals and that sort of thing, I think I don't necessarily want to badmouth some of the big hitters that we see, but it's easy to shoot arrows at the people standing out in front. But I just did not like what I saw. I did not like this feeling that you have to look a certain way. You have to look kind of polished and perfect, and you have to come across as always positive and optimistic. And there's a ton of value in that, but let's get real. Sometimes life sucks, and that's okay. Let's deal with the full spectrum of the human experience. And it just felt like there's a lot of charade out there, and a veneer, and just not authentic, sales driven behavior at the expense, a lot of the time, of people's real mental health, that can be, damaged in the process.
I think there's something to that. So we're segueing into kind of a different part of the conversation, which is fine. But yeah, I think in fairness, when I first started running across coaches, I'm a little bit older than you are, but I started running across coaches about 15, 20 years ago. I didn't find very many of them to be particularly impressive. I didn't find many of them to be people like saying, oh, well, this person is worth paying, other than paying $200 an hour, instead of the people who I do respect and are giving me lots of awesome advice for free. Right. I didn't see a lot of that. Right. And I do think that there still remain coaches that, sort of come from the school of those who can't do teach. And we've actually had a podcast on. I actually had my professional coach on, and we went through some of that. Maybe I'll revisit that topic as well. But I don't think that you're being unfair. I mean, coaching is largely unregulated. The certifications are very disparate. You know, what does one mean versus another? How meaningful are they at all, et cetera? And you know, candidly, the quality of coaches is really quite variable. So I don't think you're necessarily painting them with a broad brush. I think just the reality of life is that if you see a pattern over and over and over again, that's going to be the pattern that is associated with you.
Yeah.
And you know, that's where it's, at some point, stereotypes do come from someplace. They weren't just made up. They occurred because enough people observed enough behaviors that they start to become an easy way to characterize people, rightly or wrongly.
Yeah, and I think we haven't seen or been exposed to. It's like a self-fulfilling prophecy. To you think it's going to be a certain way, so then you just start seeing it that way, and you start looking for those types of people. And that's kind of all we saw is, like, you know, white bread coaches. It's just sort of the same message and the same. You know, one might be a foot taller than the other. That's about the only difference. They all just seemed the same. And I don't think we're getting, it's the big discussion that's been coming up, you know, in the last year plus, and it's been coming up a lot longer than that, but just who are we representing? Who are we putting out there? And the diversity in thinking, backgrounds, ethnicity, behaviors, we need to see more of that. And I think I do see that happening. And maybe it's because I got more into it. So I started looking at who else was out there who didn't have the huge reach and the number one spot on YouTube, et cetera.
Well, and I think the numbers also support it. Putting coaching aside for a second, we both know, everybody listening to this knows about the great resignation, the great job hop, whatever you want to call it. And I think money is a big part of that. Let's be real. Money matters. More money you have, more sandwiches you can buy, and better sandwiches, like you can like wheat bread. But also, this is also sort of the great reckoning with authenticity. You know, being in an organization where you just don't fit and you try to make yourself fit because you feel like you have to. And I've been through that scenario. It is wearing, it is draining, it beats on you constantly. And now that people have an opportunity where labor has leverage for the first time in our economy in a very, very long time, you're seeing just people vote with their feet, right? Coaches or not. My job, for example, as an employer is not so much to give people jobs, never was, but as much as it is to provide solutions for my clients, it's also to provide the right platform for my people to thrive. Ultimately, maybe with us, maybe someplace else. They're not going to retire with me, statistically speaking. I know that. They know that. That's okay. But yeah, I do think that authenticity piece is real, and I think coaching is becoming more respected because I think coaches are now embracing the understanding for that need for authenticity. It's no longer about turning yourself into the template that the market wants, but rather understanding what your own template is and bending the rest of the world around to your will.
Yeah, putting yourself out, you know, it's the whole light attracts light thing. Just put who you really are out there, and then you will attract the type of people that you will probably work well with. If you're putting out some phony shit, you're not going to get, it's not going to be fruitful for anybody. It's probably a lot more damaging. That's something that really drove me nuts too. When I was doing a lot of these storytelling workshops in particulars, I would see how people in office settings were, it seemed so much, there's so much fear-based leadership, because if the leaders themselves aren't courageous enough to put themselves out there and to be vulnerable and to say what's really on their minds, and, you know, you have to have some filtering and compassionate communication skills are good in this I was just hearing about, what is it? Radical candor. And sort of some people hating on it. And I was like, yeah, there's a line to walk, right? Your balance, but be you. And if you're not happy, you need to find a way to express that. And if that can't be resolved, you need to get out, because it's just going to cause everyone to suffer.
And, because of that, and believe it or not, audience, this actually does relate to the actual topic. This is actually what we're seeing as a great pivot.
Yeah.
Right. Lots of people are pivoting their lives because they've been forced to reckon with things in their lives, with personal, professional, both. There's nothing like being in lockdown with your family for a while to find out if you actually like them or not. I mean, that will send a very clear signal as to what your relationship really looks like. So I'm curious. I think you have a really interesting answer for this. No pressure. When you decide that you're going to pivot, or the pivot happened, what was the hardest thing for you to leave behind?
The first thing that popped in my head was money. Knowing I had a regular.
Money's a thing.
The least interesting answer I can think of. But yeah, it's reliable, knowing I have reliable income. So I, empathize a lot with people who are afraid to leave a job, because that's all you know, and that's what you need. You gotta pay the bills. So that's one thing. And I think it's also a form of your identity and a story you had about yourself and what you're doing in the world and what you mean to people, what you bring, what kind of value you have. And now you are you're at the reckoning, you're at ground zero, and you have to decide what of those things are still true and what do you want to be true.
When you pivoted, did you have any kind of template? Was there somebody that you knew that had done something similar, or was there an example of a company, individual, organization that made a successful pivot that made you think, okay, there are lessons I can take from this thing, or maybe mentors that helped you along the way?
So when I was first getting up the nerve to put myself out there as brain coach, speaker, I found a coach who was previously a copywriter and transitioned, made the pivot to become a creative director. And I thought, perfect. She's going to understand what it's like, not just making a transition, but also we have very similar backgrounds and how that can be really, to just understand this world. So working with her was instrumental in just having that, empathy and somebody, and also a really good coach. So that gave me even more confidence of like, okay, I found a good coach and it's continuing to change my perception. Also, now I'm putting myself out there. So this is working. So that her name's Hillary Weiss. She comes to mind immediately. And then as far as what I was doing exactly, I felt like it was a bit nebulous. There's people, Jeff Chrysler is one of my favorite humans. He is a writer. He started as a lawyer, and then he decided to become a stand-up comedian. And then he got into behavioral science, and he now works in a company, quite a big one that I'm losing the name of, JP Morgan. And so people like that who just didn't follow a linear path, because it's very difficult if you don't have a blueprint. You got to make it up as you go. And it's just nice to see other people who've done that.
Now, I asked you earlier about what you had to let go in order to pivot. I wanted to ask the flip side of that. What did you take with you? What was valuable that you made sure from your previous experience you're going to take with you to that next journey?
On the very tactile, both level, writing skills. Everybody needs them. Storytelling and writing skills, because no matter what you do, no matter where you go, you're going to have to learn how to communicate it and tell a good story. And so that is lifelong, and it's always going to be a part of what I do and who I am. And I think the courage to step out into unknown places. I think that, I grew up on an active volcano. When I was 7, my house burned down. We were homeless. And so I think from an early age, after my parents split, this is a very early age of learning resilience, or, rebuilding, and having a perspective that things can disappear. Nothing will last forever, but you will be okay, or you'll be dead. And maybe you're still okay when you're dead. But you will figure it out. And as long as you keep kind of, I love that quote by Oscar Wilde. It's like, all of us are in the gutter. It's just some of us are looking up at the stars. And I think that it's like you still have somewhere to go and keep going in that direction. There's no, rush or race or anything. And it's important to kind of watch your steps sometimes. But I love that notion of just keep looking up at the stars.
So I know my listeners are going to kill me if I don't answer this question. Where was this volcano that you grew up on?
Oh yeah, the Big Island of Hawaii.
Oh yeah,
and yeah, it's I haven't been back since 2018. There was another eruption that displaced my dad again, so he moved to Maui to a town called Haiku, which is great because he's been writing haiku for longer than I've been alive. Yeah, that's my upbringing.
Okay. Interesting. Yeah, we sort of forget that Hawaii basically is a chain of volcanoes.
Yeah, and there's 5 on the Big Island alone. And then, I just read they discovered a new one they hadn't known about before, further up in the atoll. That's like, I forgot. It's almost the entire, it's like 3/4 of the size of the Big Island. That's one volcano. It's the most massive volcano they've ever discovered on Earth. It's dead, long dead, but it's they've just found it under the sea.
I was going to ask, it's probably not above water. It must still be below sea level then.
Yeah, it's an ancient fossil volcano.
So how long, I mean, do you consider yourself having pivoted, or are you still in the process of doing that?
That's a great question. I think my answer is yes.
Okay.
Yeah, because I think there's a part of me that wanted to erase and eliminate everything that came before. And it's like, I'm never touching words or writing or doing outsourcing. And then this project came along where it's writing a really cool, it's actually currently writing about a women's sports team. I don't want to say too much, but so I said yes to it because I couldn't not say no. It was too cool. It was too exciting. And I knew I would do a good job at it. So while I said, I'm never taking on another writing project, this came in, I'm like, well, I think you're always in motion. So the pivot could be kind of like, you go back over here for a bit and you look over here, and it's a new direction, but there's some things that I'll still take with me.
Are there new skills that you've had to learn, maybe that you weren't expecting, or maybe didn't expect to have to study so much in order to make this pivot to where you're going now?
Oh man, marketing yourself. Woof. Yeah. I used to just be the person telling other people what to do. And now I'm going to put my own face out there, and I think you may have found me from the Tiny Tips video. I think that might've been something on LinkedIn.
Yep.
But so I started figuring it out. I'm like, all right, well, no one's going to know what you do if you don't tell them hello. So put yourself out there. And that's been a learning curve. And really it's more time consuming than I thought it might be, let alone creating a podcast or a video and just the editing and the production. And there's a lot more involved than I think you might imagine at first, going, it's just going to make this cool little thing and put it out there. No. Being more strategic and thoughtful about the kinds of stuff I'm putting out there and when. So I'm actually working on a full content plan, which it's just hilarious to me that I did not do that for myself, but I spent like 13 years doing that or helping other people do that. So I think it's applying stuff that you might know, but now you have to do it to yourself if you're in that position of marketing yourself.
We're talking with Jocelyn Brady, creative brain jostler and brainutainer, and the topic is, should I pivot? That's really interesting. I think a lot of us as we kind of move along in life and our professional lives, particularly if we ever strike out on our own, I think we do confront the fact that we're going to find out if everything we've been telling other people to do actually works. Right? I had my own single shingle for about 3 years or so. And that was the narrative I basically told people. They asked me, how is this? I said, well, we're going to find out if any of the advice I've been giving people the last 10 years or so is any good at all. Right. And fortunately, it turned out that it was reasonable. But to be perfectly candid, it was a little disconcerting to sort of confront that, because I did sort of internalize, rightly or wrongly, this is not just about me, but this is actually about how I have held myself out as an advisor to other people, and still doing that. And if I can't even make a go of a sole practitioner, then I'm really going to have to take a step back and reevaluate myself. Probably go get a PhD in Old Norse or something, and just make a living out of reading Viking sagas or something. That was sort of the plan, the fallback plan B. My wife was happy it didn't go there. So I can totally see how it's jarring when all of a sudden it's you're looking around at, who am I going to tell to do this? Oh, nobody. It's me.
Yeah. Oh God, is my advice to myself good? Oh,
Yeah.
Can I live up to my own standards? Yeah.
So, where is the business? How would you characterize the business now? Tell our listeners about exactly kind of what you do and why you love it, and why, has it been a good move for you since you did it?
Yeah, I started with just stepping into one-on-one brain coaching and putting myself out there for that, and seeing how I could make that work, and it worked. And I couldn't. It's not that I couldn't believe it. It was just like, wow, it's fast. And the reason I love that is helping people figure out, what I like to say is helping you create what you most want before you die. No big deal. So that, to me, I couldn't think of anything cooler than helping people create that thing, whatever it is to them. Some people, it's one person always wanted to start an art gallery, and she did that. One person wanted to write a children's book, and she did that. Another person wanted to quit his job, make a pivot into a totally new career and make six figures. It's like, okay, so he did that. And it spans the gamut from really personal. Sometimes it's more nebulous. Like, I just want to have more fun in my life and have a better relationship with my kids because my business is going really well. And then it's the flip side of, I'm just starting my business and I want to figure it out and make it work. That is extremely fulfilling. And then in the next year, I'm going harder on really speaking in workshops. So back to doing some more workshops. Again, I love them. But, around storytelling, but also around perspective and communication skills and play, creativity. And I picked up some speaking gigs this year. I got to speak at the 3% conference, and oh man, it's so much fun. Basically, you get to show up and talk story, and sometimes interactive, sometimes more interactive than others. And it's like going out and being a stand-up comedian without having to put on all the work, or
Okay.
You don't have to go to the open mics every single night, and no one expects you to be funny. It's great. Yeah, like I, as you read in my intro, I absolutely love stand-up comedians. I hosted them. I never did it myself, but they have the most amazing work ethic and are just incredible students and minds. And so I feel if I can tap some of that in some of the work that I do, then I'm also really fulfilled with that.
You could do stand-up comedy, I think.
I was thinking about it, if open mics are a regular thing for a while, I might go check them out. I think it's really good to put in the reps and to feel. A friend of mine actually just challenged me last week. He said, I will go do another stand-up set if you do it. And I was like, okay, I'm ready to go. I'm ready to go flail around.
Jocelyn, we're running out of time here. I want to be respectful of your time. There are probably topics that we might have covered that our listeners wish we would have done so, but didn't, or maybe they would have liked us to go deeper on something that we did talk about. If somebody wants to follow up with you for more information, can they do so? And if so, what's the best way to do that?
Yeah, jocelynbrady.com, jostle them, JOCELTHEM, like them, not you, not us. on Instagram and YouTube. Also, what else do I got for you? LinkedIn, Jocelyn Brady.
Well, that's going to wrap it up for today's program. I'd like to thank Jocelyn Brady so much for sharing her expertise with us. We'll be exploring a new topic each week, so please tune in so that when you're faced with your next business decision, you have clear vision when making it. If you enjoy these podcasts, please consider leaving a review with your favorite podcast aggregator. It helps people find us so that we can help them. If you would like to engage with me on social media with my chart of the day and other content, I'm on LinkedIn as myself and at Unblakeable on Facebook, Twitter, Clubhouse, and Instagram. Also, check out my new LinkedIn group called A Group That Doesn't Suck. Once again, this is Mike Blake. Our sponsor is Brady Ware & Company, and this has been the Decision Vision Podcast.